You're sitting on a smooth rock somewhere in what will one day be called France. The year is 30,000 BC. The fire is low. You've already eaten. The hunt is done. The children are sleeping. You have nothing to do, nowhere to go, and no one to answer to for the next several hours. What is going through your mind? Most people assume the answer is nothing complicated. Ancient humans were busy surviving. Their thoughts must have been simple: food, danger, sleep, repeat. The interior life of a Stone Age human, we tell ourselves, was a much quieter thing than ours. Less crowded, less anxious, less aware. That assumption turns out to be almost completely wrong. And the real answer is something modern neuroscience and anthropology have only begun to piece together. In 1966, an anthropologist named Marshall Sahlins gave a lecture at the University of Chicago that quietly demolished the standard view of ancient life. He called it the original Affluent Society, drawing on field studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, including the Bakungsan of the Kalahari. He showed something nobody expected. These people, living in conditions closest to those of our deep ancestors, worked only 3 to 5 hours a day to meet their needs. The rest of the time, and there was a lot of it, they sat, talked, walked, slept, made things, told stories, and thought. Sahlins' findings sent shockwaves through anthropology because they reversed a basic assumption that had stood for 2 centuries. We had imagined our ancestors as exhausted, half-starved creatures clawing at the edge of existence. The data said the opposite. Their lives were not desperate. By hours alone, they were more leisurely than the average modern office worker's life, which raises an obvious question. If ancient humans had hours of unstructured time every single day for hundreds of thousands of years, what was filling all of that mental space? The answer comes from a place you wouldn't expect. A British evolutionary psychologist who spent his career studying chimpanzees and discovered something profound about human minds. His name is Robin Dunbar. In the 1990s, Dunbar proposed what's now called the social brain hypothesis. He had noticed that the size of a primate's neocortex, the outer wrinkled layer of the brain responsible for complex thought, correlated almost perfectly with one thing: not tool use, not problem solving, the size of the social group that primate lived in. The bigger the group, the bigger the brain. And humans had the biggest brains of all because humans lived in the most complex social worlds, tracking who owes who, who's allied with whom, who's angry, who's available, who can be trusted, who's lying. This is what our brains evolved to do. Dunbar even calculated, based on the size of the human neocortex, the maximum number of stable social relationships a person can hold in their head at once. That number is around 150. It's now called Dunbar's number. Hunter-gatherer bands, ancient tribal villages, military companies, even the average person's social network today, all cluster suspiciously close to that figure. Our ancestors lived inside it. Their minds, like ours, were built to navigate a web of roughly 150 relationships at all times. Dunbar later studied what modern humans actually talk about when they aren't busy with a task. He found that around 65% of all conversation is about other people: gossip, relationships, reputation, who did what, who said what, who's with who. He concluded that language itself likely evolved not to coordinate hunting or warn of danger, but to do socially what other primates do through grooming, to keep track of an ever-growing web of relationships. If this is what our brains are built for, then the answer to what ancient humans thought about all day starts to come into focus. They thought about each other, constantly, the same way we do. But there's another layer, and it might be the strangest part of all. In 2001, a neuroscientist named Marcus Rachel at Washington University discovered something that changed how we understand the human mind. He noticed that when people in fMRI scanners were asked to do nothing, just lie still and let their thoughts drift, a specific network of brain regions lit up. It included the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, parts of the temporal lobe. He called it the default mode network. When you're not focused on a task, your brain doesn't shut off. It switches mode, and the mode it switches into has a very specific job: thinking about yourself, replaying your past, imagining your future, simulating other people's minds, telling yourself a story about who you are and what your life means. The default mode network is essentially the storyteller inside your head, and it is ancient. Comparable structures exist in other primates, but in humans it is extraordinarily developed. This means that whenever an ancient human sat down by a fire with nothing pressing to do, their brain immediately did what your brain does in the same situation. It started telling stories about a fight they had with someone yesterday, about a dead relative they missed, about a hunt that had gone wrong, About what the woman 3 campsites over had said when they passed her about what would happen if the rains didn't come. The ancient mind wasn't quiet. It was a constantly running narrative engine, just like yours. The content was different. The machinery was the same. In 2010, 2 Harvard researchers named Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert ran a famous study where they pinged thousands of people throughout the day with an app, asking what they were doing and what they were thinking. The result was striking. People spent roughly 47% of their waking hours not thinking about whatever they were doing. Their minds had wandered somewhere else, into the past, into the future, into other people's heads, into possibilities that didn't yet exist. Modern humans mind wander almost half the time they're awake. There is no reason to think ancient humans were any different. If anything, with fewer external distractions and far more empty time, they may have mind wandered more. Their thoughts drifted constantly through memory, imagination, and the lives of other people in their group. But ancient humans didn't only think about each other and themselves. They thought about the dead. In the cave of Shanidar in northern Iraq, archaeologists in the 1950s uncovered the burials of Neanderthals from around 60,000 years ago. One of them, known as Shanidar 4, had been laid carefully on his side, surrounded by what may have been intentionally placed flowers. The interpretation is still debated, but the burials themselves are not. Multiple Neanderthal sites across Europe show clear evidence that the dead were treated, positioned, sometimes buried with objects. In 2015, the discovery of Homo naledi in a deep South African cave system suggested that even an earlier human species, with a brain far smaller than ours, may have deliberately placed their dead in a chamber far from the surface. The behavior is so deliberate it cannot easily be explained by accident. This means that for at least 60,000 years, and possibly much longer, humans and their close relatives have been thinking about death, sitting with it, making rituals around it, carrying the memory of specific dead individuals in their minds for years after they were gone. Some of what ancient humans thought about all day was simply this: the people who weren't there anymore. They also thought about the sky. In the cave of Lascaux in France, painted around 17,000 years ago, certain wall figures are aligned in ways that match the position of the stars during specific seasons. The Pleiades cluster appears to be depicted above the famous bull. Researchers like Michael Rappengluck have argued that some of the dots painted around animal figures represent star maps. Now, whether or not every interpretation holds, what's clear is that ancient humans paid extraordinary attention to the night sky, and they thought about things that didn't exist. In a cave in southern Germany, archaeologists found a small ivory figurine called the Lion Man. It's roughly 40,000 years old. The body is human. The head is a cave lion. It is the oldest known depiction of something that has never existed in the physical world. Someone, 40,000 years ago, sat with a piece of mammoth ivory and a stone tool for over 400 hours, carving an animal from their imagination. That figurine is proof that ancient humans were not just thinking about what they could see. They were thinking about what they could only picture. By 11,000 BC, the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey were aligned to specific celestial events. Long before agriculture, before writing, before cities, humans were tracking the movement of stars and giving them meaning, which means that part of what ancient humans thought about, lying on their backs at night, was the same thing you might think about right now if you stepped outside and looked up. What is all of that? Where does it go? What does it mean that I am here, looking at it? And then there's the strangest layer of all. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt at the University of Nevada developed a method called descriptive experience sampling. He gave subjects a beeper that went off at random moments and asked them to report exactly what was happening in their minds at that instant. What he found surprised everyone. A significant percentage of modern people don't actually have a constant inner monologue. They don't think in continuous sentences. Their inner experience is largely imagistic, emotional, sensory, bodily. Words come and go, but they aren't the main current. If modern humans, with our endless verbal scaffolding of books and screens and self-talk, don't all think in words, then what about ancient humans before written language, before complex grammar, before the modern explosion of vocabulary? Their inner worlds were almost certainly less verbal than ours, more visual, more felt, more tied to the immediate texture of the world, the smell of the fire, the feel of the cold air, the sound of someone breathing nearby. Their thinking wasn't simpler, it was differently structured. A continuous stream of images, memories, faces, sensations, and emotions, with words threading through it only when needed. So here is what an ancient human actually thought about. They thought about the people in what those people might be thinking, what those people had said and done, who was angry, who was kind, who could be trusted. They thought about the dead, the parents and siblings and friends who used to be there and now weren't. They thought about the sky, the seasons, the patterns above them that suggested some larger order. They imagined creatures that didn't exist, futures that hadn't happened, gods that no one had ever seen. They replayed the past, drifted through possibilities. They felt their bodies in the world, the wind, the weight of their own breath. Their minds were full, their minds were loud in their own way. We didn't invent thinking. We just changed what we think about. We replaced people with feeds, the dead with notifications, the sky with screens. The default mode network is still running. The stories are still being told. They are simply about different things now. If you sit alone in a quiet room and let your mind drift, what surfaces is something extraordinarily old. The structure of human thought has not changed in 100,000 years, only its furniture has. The ancient human sitting on the rock 30,000 years ago, looking into the fire after a quiet day, was doing exactly what you do every time you stare at the ceiling at night, replaying, imagining, worrying, loving, remembering. You have never been alone in any of it, not once, not for the entire history of our species.